So help me God. So help me God.
So help me God.
So help me God.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Hello and welcome to So Help Me Pod. This is Scott Lee, crooning into your ears live. Well, not really live, this is recorded, but this is a podcast that my brother started because he's trying to get his doctorate. Hello and welcome to So Help Me Pod. This is a podcast started by my brother, Robert Lee. This is Scott Lee tuning in live to your ears with soothing sounds. Today, we're going to be talking about William McKinley. He served from 1843 to 1901 and was the 25th president of the United States.
He didn't serve. I'm taking.
Oh, wow,
Okay.
he died. I totally read that
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
He died. He was 1843 to 1901.
Why don't you let me take this over from
served
here?
from-
Yeah.
He was a Methodist.
Yeah. Are you good?
Hello, and welcome to So Help Me Pod, a podcast started by my brother, and I so graciously accepted to be on it too. My name is Scott Lee, and today we're going to be talking about the 25th President of the United States, President William McKinley. He served from 1897 to 1901. Go ahead, Rob.
Scott wanted to do that, so I'm letting him do one. That's his payment for this podcast.
No, it's not. My payment, he's paying me straight up green. So much money.
Anyway.
Per word? Oh, it's incredible.
Well, welcome everybody, and picture yourself as President of the United States at a time of great innovation and forward progress as social change. It's somewhat hard to imagine in our day and an age where polarization and misinformation rule the day. Yet for William McKinley, as he stared down the 20th century, he was poised to face it head on. Unfortunately for William McKinley, and for even all of us, he would meet an assassin's bullet 1 year into the 1900s. Yet even that was a chance for him to prove the nature of his character, his faith, and his public policy. Let's learn about William McKinley. William McKinley was born in the Niles on the Western Reserve in Ohio country in 1843. He would be the last president to have been actively serving in the American Civil War. He served admirably during that war, and post-war life was consumed with the establishment of a law practice in Canton, Ohio. His first foray into politics would come in Canton as he stumped for his former war buddy, who was running for governor of Ohio. McKinley would offer speeches on behalf of Rutherford B. Hayes as he sought election to that office. Rutherford B. Hayes would go on to be elected the 19th president of the United States, as would another war friend, the friend we talked about on our last podcast, the 20th president, James A. Garfield. After successfully arguing cases on behalf of blue-collar citizenry, McKinley would be elected as representative of Ohio's 17th congressional district in 1876. He would serve there until a gerrymandered election map signaled his defeat in the election in 1890. Despite the map being stacked against him, he only lost his last House election by 300 votes. His defeat from the House of Representatives would not signal an exit from politics, though, as he subsequently was nominated for the governorship of Ohio in 1891 and won election to that office. He would serve there until his election to the White House. McKinley would win the election in 1896 against Democrat, and many of you who have taken AP U.S. history will have heard this name. I don't know why it's so prevalent in those courses, but it is William Jennings Bryan. McKinley would face and defeat Bryan again in the election of 1900. William Jennings Bryan would go on to run a total of 3 presidential campaigns and lose all 3 of them. Yet he is the person that we hear the most about in AP U.S. history. President McKinley's first term would signal the start of the Spanish-American War. This war was the first large-scale conflict faced by a president since Lincoln, and one that involved significant naval forces and fleets. By the war's end, Spain would sign the Treaty of Paris, ending 4 centuries of Spanish presence on the American continent. The treaty, signed in 1898, would cede control of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines to the United States, and grant the Republic control of Cuba. To this day, the United States still holds control of Guam and Puerto Rico. However, the Philippines and Cuba have subsequently left United States control. The war would also start a period of naval superiority of the United States upon the waters of the world. President McKinley himself was personally integral in the terms and conditions of American expansion into those areas, something we'll talk about at length in a moment as it involves his faith and public life. That said, the patriotic fervor of the war, coupled with a booming economy, led to McKinley's re-election. He handily beat William Jennings Bryan the second time around in 1900. That said, plans for a second term would be cut short soon after he began the second term journey. President McKinley was shot on September 6, 1901 in Buffalo, New York. He would die 8 days later on September 14th, 1901. His death came longer after Lincoln's. When Lincoln was shot, Lincoln didn't survive the night, but he tarried a shorter time than Garfield's extended battle with the assassin's bullet. The third president shot in 4 decades would signal a need for a shift in presidential security. In response to President McKinley's assassination, his successor and Vice President Theodore Roosevelt would come to be the first president to enjoy the security provided by his newly assigned security force, the United States Secret Service. So what about McKinley's faith and public life? President McKinley was a lifelong Methodist, and we have a wonderful bonus episode with Dr. Lacey Warner about Methodism in the American presidency. He experienced a conversion experience in his early years, and he akin it much to that of the road to Damascus that led him to firmly believe that America was not only an instrument for expansionism and expansionist policies, but for the sanctification of the world. You might compare this to a city on a hill experience. He saw the nation as an opportunity to change the way the world was. Prior to the outbreak of the American Civil War, his family was staunchly abolitionist in their viewpoints due to their affiliation with the Methodist sentiment in the northern United States and territories. You'll come to remember that during the Civil War, the Methodist Church broke into 2 parts: the Methodist Episcopal Church North and the Methodist Episcopal Church South. This would have an effect on the future president, President McKinley, and his policies. While practicing law in Canton, William McKinley would fall in love with Ida Saxon, whom he would marry in 1871. They were married at First Presbyterian Church in Canton, which was a new facility at the time of their wedding. And despite the wedding being with the Presbyterians, and Ida McKinley would soon join her husband as being quite the devout, pious Methodist layperson. His blending of religious fervor and patriotism led him to push for American presence in foreign policy. This was most exemplified in the Philippines, where the 25th president angled for stronger American presence there after the United States took control of the territory during the Spanish-American War. Methodist missionaries and ministers, sensing an opportunity, met with the president and encouraged such a tactic. This would lead to a Methodist president sending a Methodist presence to the Philippines that lasted to this day, after the first Protestant service was held by a Methodist minister in the Philippines in 1898. To this day, there are still a very, very large Methodist presence in the Philippines, and they hold one of the largest contingencies of United Methodists outside of the United States. McKinley's belief in the primacy of grace would lead him to forgive his assassin before his untimely demise in September of 1901. Insofar as he was able to feel sorry for the individual who shot him, he inquired into his well-being as he lay being bedridden after being shot. Some of his first words offered post-shooting were that of conferring mercy upon the man who had wanted him dead. Something I'm not sure all of us could say about someone who might be a would-be assassin for us. As the president's condition worsened in 1901, he was stalwart and staunch in his faith. As the hour drew near for his death, the First Lady exclaimed she wanted to go too, indicating that she wanted to die with her husband. President McKinley calmed her and said that we're all going, not my will, but God's. He would later sing a hymn, the famous hymn that we all know so dear to us now, "Nearer, my God, to thee." before dying at 2:15 a.m. on September 14th, 1901. His funeral would be held at First Methodist Church in Canton, Ohio. A man who was gone far too soon for a leader of our country, and a respectable Methodist one at that. Scott, what questions do you have about President William McKinley?
First off, I have a comment about Near My God to Thee. Shout out. That's a super cool song. I think my first question would be like the Methodist history at this moment. You said that there was a split due to slavery, probably, or maybe even segregation or desegregation. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
The Methodist Episcopal Church at the time, which is what would become the Methodist Church in 1939 and the United Methodist Church in 1968. The Methodist Episcopal Church South, I think, is easier to talk about because it was the church that split over the issue of slavery with the Methodist Episcopal Church, which some people call the Methodist Episcopal Church North. If you're where we're from, we kind of call it that to help delineate between the two. As things started to break apart in the 1800s over the issue of civil war, many felt that it was time to split off and start to form a Confederate Methodist Church, and this is essentially what the Methodist Episcopal Church was. But they quickly realized that after the war they lost. What happens then? It took a long time for them to come to terms with their own inability to come back together, and so they would ultimately become part of the Methodist Church when it would come back together in the 1930s. But that's how long it took. So you've got these two kind of sparring denominations over the polity of slavery. Even, in the 1930s, it may not be slavery at that point, but it was certainly race and race relations and other political issues of the time. The church is very much involved in politics at that point. So yeah, McKinley would have been a part, to be clear, of the Methodist Episcopal Church, not the Methodist Episcopal Church South.
My next question is, why him out of everyone?
Scott, you know that growing up, I was really much a very, very dorky person when it came to the presidents and studying them and getting to know them better. I wanted to know more about them. One of the reasons, honestly, and this is somewhat silly, that I chose President McKinley, not now, but then, was because he died on my birthday. I just thought that was a cool connecting point. September 14th is my birthday. And I just always thought, well, if they can't be born on there, at least you could die then. So that was kind of cool. But I think what made it so interesting about McKinley, looking at it from a more, political public policy standpoint, is that this was happening all at a time of great upheaval and change in our world. The Mexican-American War, of course, was fought, or the Spanish-American War, was fought around that time. Obviously, that's a big point for our country. But deeper than that, you've got this really turning of the clock. This nation is no longer a young republic. It's suddenly this middle-aged nation that needs to figure itself out. And McKinley does a really good job of helping the nation do that. In terms of leadership, I think it's important to note that there's some real problems there, though, if we look at it from a without rose-tinted glasses. I think it's important to note the colonialism and subsequent violence caused by the expansionist policies of the 1890s after the Spanish-American War, and President McKinley stands as a figurehead for such policies. The missionary work in the Philippines would have been significant, and it would have had a detriment, right? Like, it really would have helped codify white presence in a non-white space. And the missionary work there would cause a natural detriment to the evolution of the people there. Yet it's also a mixed bag, right? Because it's difficult to ignore the good work done there by Methodists, including Methodism's presence today in Asia. It's impossible to detach the legacy of colonialism from the presence of Christianity in that area. All that's to say, you've got to consider that when creating a legacy of a president. What does it mean to have this president who was so ardently fixed on bringing Christianity to places And then we have to ask the question, did those places want that Christianity? Did they need that Christianity? Did they need that colonialist expansionism that was part of the American westward and futuristic ideals? I don't know. I don't have the simple answers for that, are impossible to find. So I think that's something to consider as we consider these presidents. When I started this project, it was my attempt, and we'll know that soon all too well. The presidents that I chose are not all good and they're not all bad. There's some really good people in this cast of 12 that I chose to give you the initial overview of the presidency. But that said, there's some people that have been in the presidency that were not that great, and we'll talk about them here pretty soon too.
Why does the Methodist Church split every 50 years?
That's a really good question. And Scott, I think you're alluding to the fact that the Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church today, is dealing with a schism of its own with the Global Methodist Church's developments over the Global Methodists' anti-gay theology, and the United Methodist Church's reticence to condemn gay people on the basis of who they are. I think simply and directly, the Methodist Church, and Lacey Warner does a really good job of talking about this on the podcast that I mentioned. She does a really good job of saying that we used to really be a big tent denomination. If you think about it, George Bush and Bill Clinton both were able to somehow attend a United Methodist Church and be okay with themselves. This is not the case anymore. I doubt that there would be a Republican president who will be United Methodist anytime soon. You just don't see that anymore. And that's because I think as things start to polarize, you see a division. And I think in times when the United Methodist or Methodist iterations of denominationalisms have split, it's because of the polarization and the lack of clarity there. So I think that's one really probably not too great answer, but one that tries to make sense of it all. So yeah. So next up, we will talk about one of our most consequential presidents of the 20th centuries. Nowadays, we talk about this president and hold him up as a litmus test for the efficacy of each subsequent presidency. It was our only 4-term president who now stands as a giant of men among the giants of the American presidency. I hope you will join me next time on So Help Me Pod as we discuss President Franklin D. Roosevelt. For now, though, we'll close with a rendition of Nearer My God to Thee at Scott's recommendation. This song was the song that President McKinley sang as he drew near to his final breaths. With that said, thanks so much for tuning in to So Help Me Pod and for being a faithful listener to this podcast that we've really enjoyed making so far. Thank you so much.
Nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee, e'en though it be a cross that raiseth me, still all my songs shall be nearer, my God, to thee, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee. Though like a wanderer, the sun gone down, darkness be over me, my rest a stone. Yet in my dreams I be nearer, my God, to thee, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee. Or if on joyful wing, cleaving the sky, sun, moon, and stars forgot, upward I fly, still
You've been listening to So Help Me Pod, a podcast of Beloved Journal in conjunction with Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. The podcast is offered in partial completion of the Doctor of Ministry degree for the Reverend Robert W. Lee. All opinions and insights offered are solely owned by that of those who offered them and do not reflect the views of stakeholders in the project. There have been 45 men and 46 presidential administrations, all of them unique. Some of them have been more interesting than others, some of them more terrifying than others. All have been part of the grand expression of democracy on the North American continent and part of the wider conversation of self-governance in the world. These men have failed profoundly, and we have failed profoundly in following their leadership along with our own sometimes antiquated and backwards ways of viewing and acting in the world. That said, this form of leadership is unlike few other, and the greatest gift we have has been given in the ways in which the American experiment continues to prosper despite our terrible misgivings. We are better off because of these men, and we are forever in their debt. For more information, visit www.roblee4.com/presidents.